Welcome. This is Outstanding Ohio's Education Event of the Month, and we're here today with Mike Stoerkel, who's an appraiser. I'm Erin Johnson. I'm a realtor with eXp Realty in Outstanding Ohio. I specialize in the Copley, Fairlawn, Bath area, but willing and able to serve most of Northeast Ohio. And today's topic, we're going to learn all about home appraisals from my friend Mike. And Mike, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Mike Stoerkel, been a certified residential appraiser now for 3 years, work for Hamilton Appraisal Services in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. And I actually kind of bring a unique perspective too, because I'm also a real estate agent like Erin. We work for the same company. So in the appraisal world, it gives me a unique vision of the properties, the values, what's going on in the market. And so it's something that has certainly made me a better agent, but also opened my eyes to a whole new world of things that most buyers and sellers don't necessarily think about. So hopefully we're able to kind of touch on some of those subjects here hour or so we can get better educated on the appraisal process for buyers and sellers.
Yeah. Yeah, if anyone has any specific questions that they have, go ahead and type those in the chat, but I've got some, and I'm sure, you know, Mike's definitely has that unique perspective, and I've learned a lot from him already. So let's just start with, what is a home appraisal and when should you get one?
So home appraisal in most cases is going to be ordered by the lender or the bank or the mortgage company that a buyer is using. Our unique position is we actually do a lot of private appraisals. So we do appraisals for divorces, estates, probate. You know, a family member just died and they left a house to 3 heirs, and one heir wants to buy 2 of the others out. So we come in and put a price on it. For agents who work with cash buyers, sometimes a cash buyer also wants an appraisal done. But basically in the 30,000-foot view, an appraisal is an opinion of value, which through our training, so to become an appraiser is actually a pretty extensive process. But through our training and through our expertise within the different markets, we assign a value to a property that's good for the date of that actual appraisal. So it's not good for the next day, it's not good for the day before, but it is an opinion of value. So I think that that's very, very important for people to understand, is this is an opinion, and like everything, there's probably multiple opinions on what a property is actually worth, but our formula and our way of making adjustments to properties gets us to a pretty close value on what the property is actually worth.
Which is different than market value, right?
Yeah, so market value is going to be what a normal buyer and normal seller are willing to agree to in a normal time. And I think we would all agree that for the past 2 or 3 years, we have not lived in normal times in the real estate world. So buyers have acted differently, meaning going over asking price, making up appraisal gaps. And most of that's due to the supply shortage that we have in our market. So that's made appraising very, very difficult, because to be able to predict what somebody may pay for a property in this market is very difficult, just because we have such a short supply of housing.
Yes. What about what's the difference between a conventional appraisal, an FHA, and a VA appraisal?
Yeah, so this is something we get asked a lot. So I don't our actual process, so the way we are trained to do the appraisal, our process doesn't necessarily change. So we still measure the house, we still look at the different attributes of the house and the property, right? So the property may have an outbuilding, it may have 10, 15, 20 acres to it. So we're still looking at the attributes of the property, but the different loans do call for us to be a little bit more stringent with different aspects of the house. So just as an example, with FHA and VA financing, it is the safety and soundness and security of the property. So they're asking for us to look at very closely. Lead-based paint issues, scraping and peeling paint. They're asking us to look at handrails that may be of danger to the new homeowners, broken windows, that kind of stuff. So it's really, and those are things that they're asking us to look at and call for repairs on. So that way the buyer's walking into a house that's safe, sound, and secure.
Very good. So what factors do you consider as part of the appraisal?
So like anything in real estate, probably number 1, 2, and 3 is location, location, location. But outside of that location, so for instance, I'm in a condo development right now. And so, you know, to look at not only similar types of condos, but what are people willing to pay in this particular area for a particular type of condo? And then if I can't find something that's immediately in this development, then I'm looking at things that are of similar size, style, and age, within a somewhat close proximity to this. So I can't, if I have data, I can't take a condo from, let's say, Stowe and say, okay, it's very similar to a condo in Westlake, because those are two totally different markets, two totally different sets of market conditions. So
Or
we
even like
really need
Cuyahoga
to stay
Falls,
as
like you
close to
have
the
to
subject as we
stay
can.
within Stowe. You couldn't even go like Cuyahoga Falls, right?
Well, we can, but
Or could you?
it's really dependent on the actual data that I can find. So if I have 30 sales of condos in Stowe and 10 of those are in the actual development, it's going to be very, very difficult for me as the appraiser to justify going outside of that area to be able to find a comp, because the people who are writing the loans are going to say, hey, Mike, why didn't you consider these sales that actually occurred in the actual development that the subject is in? The subject being the actual house we're appraising.
And you're looking for 3 comps at a minimum, right?
Yeah, so every appraisal requires at least 3. And then I will say that there's some lenders who actually ask for 4 or 5 total, some of which they want to be actual listings or pending sales, because some lenders want to use that as a way to kind of forecast what's actually happening in the particular market. So let's say, for instance, that the condo in Stowe is a $200,000 sale price, but the pendings and the listings coming up are 150. They may ask me to explain, well, Mike, this condo sold for 200, but why are the oncoming inventory, why is it so much lower than what's actually being sold right now? Because at the end of the day, the lender is at risk of the loan, right? So the buyer can just walk away and stop paying the payments. Well, then that property goes back to the bank, and the bank's not in business to lose money on properties.
Right. I mean, that's really the whole reason for this, is the bank wants to mitigate their risk. Like, is this house worth the amount that I'm loaning the buyer, right?
Correct. And and I think something important for agents and buyers alike to understand is the appraiser is the eyes and ears for the lender or the mortgage company or the bank. So our job is to go in and say, here's what we saw, here's what's going on, here's what's going on in the area, here's what's going on in the development. And then the lender can decide if it's worth the risk of taking on that loan or not.
And so you find these 3 houses that are comps, but they're not all exactly the same. So that's where you start doing different adjustments, right? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and I actually have a CE that centers around this, but what we try to do is we have to make what they call market-driven adjustments. So a market-driven adjustment means, what is a buyer actually willing to pay for a particular amenity? So for instance, if I have a deck on the back of my house, obviously that adds value over a property that doesn't have a deck, but it might have cost the seller $15,000 to add this deck. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a buyer is willing to pay $15,000 more for a used deck. So what we have to determine is, okay, if all things being equal, what is the difference that somebody's willing to pay for a deck versus not having a deck. And that's true for patios, porches, fences. The real big sticking point, Erin, is pools. In our market, a pool is probably one of the most divisive amenities you can
Love
have.
it or you hate it. Yeah.
Some
right.
people absolutely would love to have a pool, and they're only going to look at houses that have a pool. Other people look at the liability or the maintenance or the safety of a pool, and they want nothing to do with a pool.
Yes.
So a pool in our market probably doesn't add much value. But if I'm in Florida or Arizona and I don't have a pool, that's probably a huge downside, because it's probably expected in those markets that you actually have a pool.
Yeah, good point. Do you know the purchase price on the contract when you're doing the appraisal?
We do. So we get a full copy of the purchase agreement. And then if there's any addendums or anything that's pertinent to the deal. So for instance, in the last 12 to 18 months, a big addendum that most people were using was the escalation clause, meaning, hey, we're going to offer, we're going to make this our purchase price, but we'll go $1,000 over anybody else's offer. So we see all that detail and all that information. And one of the reasons we get that is not only for the purchase price, but to also see the terms of the deal. So for instance, if I'm buying that condo in Stowe for $200,000, but the seller is giving $10,000 in concessions, well, they're not really purchasing it for 200. They're purchasing it for 190, and they've built in this $10,000 for repairs or closing costs or whatever it might be. So we have to take those into account when we're actually looking at the purchase agreement. Because if I sell a condo for 200 and you, Erin, sell a condo for 200, but in my deal, the seller gave the buyer $10,000, that's not an apples to apples comparison, because one buyer obviously paid more than the other, even though the purchase prices were the same.
Right. And what about the home inspection report? Are you privy to that at all?
Generally not. Now, there are some cases where the seller or the agent will actually leave that for us in the house, which is very uncommon.
Yeah.
Because we're not, when we do the appointment or the inspection of the property, we're not looking at the same things the home inspector is looking for.
Right.
So it's very rare that we'll actually get that. Now, there's one thing that as an agent or the seller can do is leave us a list of any updates that they've made. Because there's going to be some things that, because I'm not crawling up on the roof and I'm not doing all that kind of stuff. So if a seller says, hey, we got the roof replaced in 2021, that helps me understand the overall condition of the property. Because those things do make a difference. Now, it's not a line item adjustment, but it helps me understand the overall condition that the house is in.
So are you adjusting for roof or furnace or AC or any of the like mechanical big ticket items like that?
Yeah, so those are going to come into play when we talk about the overall condition. So what we do is not an exact science. And that's why when I started, we talked about having an opinion of value. So if I'm looking at, let's say that I had literally two identical houses and they were right next door to each other. One sold yesterday and the other one's going under contract today, which is like the perfect scenario. And one house had brand new roof, brand new air conditioner, brand new furnace, brand new hot water tank, and the other one didn't. I'm able to make an adjustment that says, hey, this house is in superior condition because it had these updates where the other one didn't. But again, it has to be a market adjustment or a market driven adjustment. It's not, hey, we just spent $30,000 on roofs and HVAC. But I do understand that a buyer is willing to pay a little bit more because now they realize that they don't have to take care of some of those maintenance items on those particular amenities of the house.
Interesting. I'm sure you get a lot of questions about square footage and basements and all that stuff. So you want to give us the insight and the lowdown on that? how it's
Yes,
calculated,
we
what's included?
yeah, we love this question because there's so many different schools of thought, and this is also, and Erin did. I keep mentioning the CE. Erin took my CE class, so she kind of knows what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
But the important thing to understand is the way we're asked to measure a house is not up to us. We don't get to choose, oh, this counts and this doesn't count, and oh, it's a finished basement, it's a not finished basement. Um, so we're bound to a set of laws that are set forth from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that say this is how we measure the house, this is how we stay consistent with how we measure houses. So that way we're truly comparing apples to apples. So for buyers and sellers, the most important thing to understand is we are counting each level of the house that is 100% above grade. So the biggest point of contention is always going to be the finished walkout basement.
Yeah.
But 3 sides of it are above ground. The only part of it's at the front of the house, and it's really, really nice. And that's all true. And I don't doubt that it's really nice. And there's bedrooms down there. There's a kitchen down there. You got a theater down there. It's probably immaculate and really, 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 really well done. However, we have to count everything that's 100% above grade, but that's not to say that space is ignored, because it's not. It's definitely taken into account in the report. It's just accounted for in a different section of the report. And while it is assigned value, it is not as desirable as the first or the levels that are above grade. And the market recognizes that, because in basements you have water issues and all kinds of things that go along with it. So it's everything that is 100% above grade, and that's the entire level. So if I have a second floor, a first floor, and a basement, and the first and second floor are 100% above grade, that's what we're taking into account the most. And then we're taking into account the finished basement space in a different area of the actual appraisal report.
And what about bedrooms? What counts as a bedroom for you?
So same thing. So we've actually done new construction, believe it or not, where all the bedrooms were in the basement. And we're looking at this and going, so you've decided to make the first floor an entertaining floor, which is great. And again, I think this was like $1.2 million house.
Wow.
But all the bedrooms are in the basement. So
Interesting.
our job is to let the bank know, hey, this is really, really nice, but this is going to be a problem when they go to sell this house, because of the rules that we're bound by. Now, we also have to recognize that the market, which is the buyers and that are in the out looking for properties, they might not recognize the difference between a bedroom that's in the basement or on the first floor, second floor, because they have a space to sleep, right?
Right.
But there are certain rules that we have. So for bedrooms, does not have to have a closet. So I know that that's a big thing where, oh my God, it has to have a closet, it has to have a closet.
Yeah.
It has to have a permanent heat source. So it can't have a little space heater that's plugged into the wall to keep it warm. So it has to have a permanent heat source.
Okay.
It does have to have a cooling source, but it does not have to be air conditioning. So as long as you have a window that you can open that can cool the room, that's considered cooling that space.
Okay.
And the window has to be a certain size for an adult to be able to get out of the window in case of an emergency.
Okay.
And then the room itself has to be a certain size. So, and I've seen different reportings, but the most important number to remember is 7. So the minimum size that a bedroom can be on one side is 7 feet.
Okay.
And I think it has to be a minimum of 70 square feet. So for instance, if you have a 7 by 10 room, you've got your 70 square feet.
Okay.
The ceiling height also
Oh,
has to
yes.
be at least 7 feet tall. So this comes into play in some of the attic attic spaces in the old Cape Cods and Colonials and Akron and Cauga Falls that the ceiling heights just, they're shorter. So those come into play. And then, and again, it has to be 100% above grade.
Okay.
So
is there
the number
anything
7,
go ahead.
I was going to say the number 7 is incredibly important when you're talking about bedrooms.
Good thing to remember. So, could you call a dining room a bedroom?
And I'm glad you asked, Erin, and I forgot one thing. So in order for it to also be a bedroom, I cannot pass through another room to get to it.
Oh, okay.
So another thing in some of, and I actually did one in Bath not too long ago, where in upstairs, the way the upstairs was configured is I actually had to pass through 2 different rooms to get what they were calling the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no separate hallway that I could get to this room. So it took away that the way Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are asking us to measure, it actually made that room not a bedroom.
Okay.
But again, you also have to take into consideration the market and say, okay, if the average buyer walks into this house, are they going to know that that's not a bedroom? All they're going to see is, there's a room where we can put little Johnny or little Susie. So that's another important part.
With all that being said, how much does it matter? Because you're sometimes comparing like 3 bedrooms to a 4-bedroom because of those other criteria coming first. So are you plussing and minusing values because of more and less bedrooms, or?
Really, Erin, the biggest kind of cutoff point for bedrooms is going from 2 to 3.
Okay.
Because 2-bedroom houses have a lot less functional utility than a 3-bedroom house.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a different marketability to it, right? So if I have a family of 4, I'm never going to look at a 2-bedroom house.
Right.
So you lose some of the marketability of the house based on the number of bedrooms. But when you're talking about the difference between 3 and 4 bedrooms, I don't know that there's a huge difference.
So
in
even though
terms
you're
of
not
actual
counting
value,
it's not like dinging them either, right? In a lot of
no,
cases,
in that case for me, if I actually notice, and this actually happened, so this is a good story. We were doing an appraisal in Fox Meadows, and we kept coming up like $30,000 different. And we're going, what is going on with this? Why are we $30,000 off? These houses are same condition, same size. So 1 bedroom was actually on the first floor. So they had an owner suite on the first floor.
Okay.
And we noticed a trend in the neighborhood that people were willing to pay more money for a first floor bedroom.
Yeah.
So in that regard, when you, as an appraiser, if I notice that there's an actual difference, then I do have to make an adjustment because the market's actually willing to pay for that first floor owner suite versus having all the bedrooms upstairs.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's tricky, right? Because if you're just looking at the numbers, it may not pop out. But in this case, we kept coming up $30,000 short, and we're going, holy smokes. The houses that were selling for more all had bedrooms on the first floor. So now we make an adjustment to say, okay, if this house is superior because it has a first floor bedroom, I have to adjust for that. I have to make a market driven adjustment.
Okay. So that leads into my next question. Like, what improvements or features or whatever can add the most value to a home, or you do the most adjustments for?
So one that people probably are not going to change is just the size of the house, because we do have to make size adjustments. But I think in most cases, it's the amenities that the house has. So the decks, the fences, the porches, the patios, finishing the basement. Because again, it's not a dollar in, dollar out proposition, but we recognize that those things do add value. But I think probably the most important thing that a homeowner can actually add value is to maintain the property and don't let deferred maintenance items go. Because when I walk into a house, you notice the deferred maintenance items first, right? Like doorknobs are shaky, lights aren't turning on and off properly, the water isn't, the faucet is loose. You have carpet stains all over the place. You've got water stains on the ceiling. You've got, obviously that somebody's been dinging up the walls and the drywall and the door opening. So just maintaining your property is probably the best way to ensure its value.
Yeah.
Because as a buyer, and again, I have a unique perspective because I see both. A buyer's going to walk into that house and go, well, we're going to have to paint, we're going to have to fix all the drywall, we're going to have to do the floors. So they're automatically starting to add up what they'll have to spend.
Take value off of it. Yeah.
And they're going to say, look, it's not worth this. It's actually worth, to us, it's worth $20,000 less because we have $20,000 worth of work to do.
That's a very good point. And they do
So,
like,
yeah,
well,
I
if
think
they
just
weren't taking care of
house is a
this,
huge thing.
they do though. If they weren't taking care of this, what else did they not do? And it just puts doubt in their mind too, generally.
For sure.
Yeah. What happens if you do make a call for a repair with the appraisal? What happens after that?
Yeah, so in the report, there's a section in there that says subject to the following repairs. So I just had one that needs painted, right? So they had peeling paint all over the place. So what happens is the lender then says, okay, this is something the appraiser is requiring in the report per the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac guidelines or FHA guidelines, whatever it is. And that needs to be remedied before we can close. And so then that becomes a buyer and seller thing, right? Which is who's going to take care of that, who's going to paint it, whatever.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, it's the seller because it is their property.
Mhm.
And then once they're done with the particular repair, they'll alert the agent. The agent will tell the lender, and then the lender orders us to go back out and just confirm that all the work was done in a workmanlike way. And I'll tell you a quick story, Erin. So there was one where the garage needed to be scraped, primed, and painted.
Okay.
And what the seller did was they scraped off all the paint, but they didn't clean it up. So it was literally just sitting on the ground.
Like worse.
So it's actually worse. So now I have to go out there and say, okay, they did the repair, but now they've actually created a whole nother issue. So all this has to get cleaned up. So now same process. Now I got to go back out, confirm that they swept up all the paint because they actually made the issue worse because they just scraped it all off and they didn't clean up the mess.
They didn't vacuum it up. That's awesome.
And again, I think what's good for you as an agent who seeks out education is you can help your clients understand, here's how we can save ourselves frustration.
Yeah.
Here's how we can save ourselves time. Here's how we can save ourselves money, because they charge the buyer every time we go in and out of that house.
I was just going to ask. Yeah.
So it becomes a huge frustration with the buyer that's going, man, the seller didn't clean up the paint. Now I got to pay another X number of dollars for this appraiser to go back out. And it creates a huge amount of tension between the buyer and seller when it really didn't need to be that way.
Right. But the loan won't go through unless those repairs are made, right? Like that's it's critical. Okay. And then last but not least, what happens when the appraisal comes back for less than the purchase price?
Yeah, so that's really something where the agents now step back in, right? So they'll go into depending on who you're representing, the buyer or seller, there is an opportunity to say, hey, the appraiser actually really screwed up here, and here are 2 or 3 or 1, whatever the number is, legitimate comps that would support the value of the property. Because appraisers miss stuff, right? Like we're human, and I don't know that anybody is out there deliberately trying to undervalue a property. So if there's an opportunity for the agents or the buyer or seller or whoever to say, hey, we think that this property X is a really good comp and it's similar size, style, age, it's in a similar location. We think the appraiser should consider this, and here's the reasons why. If it's a legitimate comp, the lender may go back to the appraiser and say, hey, we just got all this information. Please consider these new comparable sales that may actually change your opinion of value. And if you've ever gone through that process, appraisers don't like to be challenged like we all do, right?
I'm
Like
sure.
we all
Yeah.
think we were right the first time. But I think if you bring a legitimate argument, a legitimate set of information and circumstances that say, hey, this was something that was truly missed and this actually affects the deal. As an appraiser, for me, I'm more than happy to admit, man, I screwed up. I really did miss that one. I'm happy to put it in my grid and see where it shakes out with the other comparables that I did choose. Because we're using the same information that the agents are. So we subscribe to the MLS, which is the multiple listing service. So we're looking at the same data that's reported in there. Now, I will also personally, because I understand both sides, let's say, Erin, that you had a listing and I was coming up short on value. I may call you and say something like, hey, Erin, if you could send me over the comparables that you used property, I'm happy to take that information. And since you're an agent that sells in this area, if there are any off-market deals that happened that made you believe that the list price should be different, because the off-market deals are not necessarily reported in the MLS. So I would have to have knowledge of that sale to even know that it existed. So that's why I call the agent, because they might say, well, I didn't sell it, but my agent in the same office sold it last, October, and it was the house next door. It was the same style and age, blah, blah, blah. And here's what they paid for it. If it's a legitimate transfer in the county auditor, then it's a sale.
Okay. And can the buyer get a whole nother appraisal if they want to? Is that a thing?
The buyer would actually have to demonstrate that there was some kind of negligence or fraud on the appraiser's behalf.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a very that's a difficult thing, because the lender is counting on us to be their eyes and ears, and obviously we're the unbiased third party in the deal.
Yeah.
So everyone else has an emotional or financial interest in that property transferring.
Yeah.
Where the appraiser does not. So obviously there's other motivations for buyers and sellers and agents and everybody else to try and get the deal over the line. But that's also why we're called in, because we don't care what the property is worth.
Right.
While we're trying to do a good job, but I don't have an interest in collecting a commission or collecting the proceeds of the actual sale. So all that stuff to me doesn't really matter.
Right. That makes sense. So at that point, if you've challenged it and maybe they come up a little bit or maybe they don't, and you still have a shortfall, basically the seller's either going to have to reduce the price or the buyer's going to have to come up with the extra cash at closing, because the lender's only going to loan up to that amount, right?
Yep.
Or maybe you meet somewhere in the middle, or maybe the buyer walks away if you can't agree. Is that, I mean, any other solutions you've found to that problem, or seen any creative things happening?
No, those are about as creative as they get. But what's interesting is in the last 18 months, buyers were so willing to overpay for houses. Right. So we're going to go 40,000 over list price, or we're going to go 100,000 over list, whatever the crazy number is. But so they were willing to do that. But now when it's happening on the other end, where we're saying the house is actually worth less than what they were willing to pay for it at the beginning, right? So they said to the seller, hey, we're going to offer you this amount of money. The appraiser comes in and says it's worth less. Now, all of a sudden, the buyer wants to backtrack and say, well, no, it's not worth that now. We need a price reduction, or we're walking. But 12 months ago, everybody was willing to go over asking price, and because they wanted to secure the house and that's all they wanted. And it's
Yeah,
just a very interesting way of
dynamic.
thinking, because it's the same scenario, right? Where if we're overpaying for a house, the market or the seller or the appraiser saying, no, it's worth X amount of dollars. But last summer and the year and a half prior, the buyers didn't care. They were coming in with more money than what was
Hmm.
than the list price, and they were perfectly willing to pay, and they didn't care.
Right.
So it's an
Yeah.
interesting
Depends how desperate
concept
you
when
are,
we
I
come in
guess.
low on an appraisal. So
Yeah. Depends how desperate they are, how much money they have.
yeah,
And I think the risk to
yeah,
the buyer is like, depending on how long you're planning to stay in the house, like the value of the house is likely to go up at some point. But like, if you're only going to stay in there for a couple of years and you overpay for it out of the gate and you want to try to turn around and sell it a couple of years later, you might not get that back. And so that's, kind of just something to keep in mind. Like, what's the house worth to you? And are you okay potentially taking a loss on it, particularly if you're looking to sell it in the next few years? Okay, well,
and I
that
think,
was
Erin, that's an
awesome.
important and
Yeah,
that's an important conversation to have as an agent with your client of, look, I have the skills in the toolbox to get you the property, but here are the potential consequences of what you're doing.
right.
But as long as you're okay with those consequences, I can help you get the house, but I want you to understand what you're actually doing.
Right, right. We can help you play the game, so to speak, but you need to understand
Correct.
the consequences. Yeah. All right. Well, that was all the questions I had for you. I'm going to open it up if anyone has any questions, or if there's anything else that you wanted to add, Mike, that you that we didn't cover that you think is important.
Yeah, if people got questions, I'm happy to answer them the best I can.
Do we have any questions? All right, I think we'll wrap it up. Well, thank you so much for your time. This is really informative. I hope that everybody got a lot out of it. If you have other questions, you can contact me, or I can get you Mike's contact information. And thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day.